Have you heard someone say that their baby that was breech, meaning not head down, turned after a chiropractic adjustment? Today's story is going to talk about what is actually happening with the biomechanics of a mother who's about to give birth, what is happening when she's in labor and it's stalled, and how chiropractic even helped her baby after that. I'm Jenna Quinton, founder of Adjust Your Media and host of What Chiropractic Doesn't Cure, Stories of an 8 podcast. Before we get into this, I'm going to tell you that if you are inspired to share more stories on social media, online, where people can find you and learn more about you, then you need Adjust Your Marketing Blueprint that gives you tools and strategy to save you time so that you can share about your chiropractic practice with more people online, share what's happening in real life, and share it on a platform so that more people can find out about it. If you want to learn more about Adjust Your Marketing Blueprint and how this is a monthly membership that supports chiropractic teams, then look in the show notes or go to adjustyourmedia.com. Now let's get started with today's episode. Welcome back to What Chiropractic Doesn't Cure, Stories of an 8 podcast. It was after one of the funniest, most engaging presentations about prenatal and pediatric chiropractic that I knew I had to have Dr. Ian Stolman on the podcast. He's a second-generation chiropractor who practices in Florida, and he has a special focus on moms and babies. So thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
First, just tell us a little bit your training and certifications, how you've done and learned more to serve moms and babies.
Yeah, so after chiropractic school, I pursued additional training and certification through the International Chiropractic Pediatric Association. I completed their pediatric certification and then later the diplomate in chiropractic pediatrics. So I've been doing this work for about 13 years and it's been an incredible journey.
I love that. I like to highlight that because there is still misconceptions around adjusting babies or pregnant women. And so just to know that you've gone into this topic in depth really sets the stage. I was excited to talk to you because I'll preface this by saying just birth and home birth are a big deal to me. I attended my first home birth as a 4-year-old watching my sister be born, and my mom's a midwife, so I really had a great introduction to attending and assisting at births before I had my own. And then I had 4 unique experiences with my own children's births, so I love to share more about this, and I hope that this is something that just really inspires and empowers families to know that birth is a wonderful experience in their lives.
Absolutely.
Well, tell us a story. Tell us about somebody who was helped with chiropractic care and how it was their body's own power that was released.
Well, I'll give you one of what I think is kind of a comprehensive story in the value of chiropractic in the perinatal population and kind of a full spectrum of what's possible. So These were in the early days of COVID, and I had a mom who was referred to my practice. At 36 weeks, her baby was breech, so in an upside down position, and her OBGYN told her to come see us because they knew in their experience of taking care of pregnant moms that moms under chiropractic care, they have better space to allow baby to get into a better position for birth, right? So this mom comes to see me. Her name's Sydney. She's 36 weeks pregnant. We find subluxation, this misalignment in the pelvis that's creating tension in the uterus and limiting baby's movement. And we adjust it via a very gentle, specific chiropractic adjustment. And what happens? Her pelvis moves better, the tension in the uterus dissipates, and baby is able to rotate in a good head down position. Now, that in and of itself is a good story.
Yeah.
But then a few weeks later, Sydney's in labor. And she's stuck, right? She's in the hospital. She's at about 4 centimeters and she's been there for like 24 hours with no change. Now, this is where the hospital really wants things to progress on a certain timeline. And so they want to they want to push things along, and they ultimately want to kind of just get her baby out and move on to the next patient. And because of the relationship that I had developed with the hospital staff actually brought us in and we adjusted Sydney's pelvis. And this time, it wasn't so much to turn baby, because that was never the intention. It was always to restore normal biomechanics and allow the nervous system and the intelligence within her body to help move things along and get baby in position. But in this case, with her stalled in labor, when we delivered that adjustment, all of a sudden, the pelvis was able to start moving appropriately again. The uterus was able to start relaxing, and she started feeling pressure in her pelvic floor. So about 20 minutes after we did the adjustment, they checked Sydney, and she was 9.5 centimeters. And
Wow.
like an hour later, she pushed out a baby vaginally, right?
Yeah.
So that in and of itself would be a really cool story. But then because baby Charlie had been in a breech position for so long, they were worried about hip dysplasia. And what they noticed is that Charlie was in a position where her hips and her legs were just completely flexed. They were right up, into her armpits almost.
Wow.
And they wouldn't straighten out. And so they did a CT scan, and they said that Charlie had bilateral hip dysplasia. Now, the treatment for hip dysplasia is to essentially put the baby in a harness and hold the hips in place while the pelvis matures and forms around it. So she was getting fitted for this harness, and the mom was texting me, telling me this story. And I said, you know what? While you wait for the orthopedist to get the harness ready, why don't you bring Charlie in? We'll get her adjusted. Mm-hmm. So the first photo I ever have of Charlie getting adjusted, she only had her onesie on halfway because they could not straighten out her legs enough to get the full onesie on. And I didn't touch her hips. Right? I just simply went up to the very upper part of the neck where she exhibited all of that stress and tension from the birth process. And I found a subluxation at misalignment here, and I delivered a gentle adjustment, no twisting, popping, or cracking, just some specific pressure to restore normal neurobiomechanics. And what happened was, is as I was delivering this adjustment, Charlie's legs start to relax and they straighten out. And they go back to the hospital the next day, and the orthopedist is confused as who's this baby, right? Like, why are we putting a harness on this baby? So they redid the CT exam, and they found that Charlie didn't have hip dysplasia.
Wow.
Now, here's the thing. Chiropractic didn't treat a breech baby. Mm-hmm. Chiropractic didn't treat stalled labor. Chiropractic didn't treat bilateral hip dysplasia in a newborn. Chiropractic restored normal neurobiomechanics, allowing the body to do what the body always wanted to do, but there was interference to that normal physiological process. And that, to me, I think really all in one family unit, all in a matter of about 4 weeks, really embodies what's possible through chiropractic and how just the addition and the availability of chiropractic to one family can dramatically change the course of their life.
Absolutely. I watch way too much sci-fi, so I think about alternate realities. I think about, those alternate paths where this could have, from those crossroads, gone differently.
Yeah. Well, and you think about it, right? Like, we know that a baby who's born via C-section, which would have been the case if baby hadn't turned, is far more likely to exhibit digestive or autoimmune issues later on in life because they're not being exposed to the vaginal flora. Mm-hmm. We see that a baby who has a really long, difficult labor is more prone to birth trauma. And through the epigenetic impact of childbirth hypothesis, we actually see that increase in stress can negatively prime a baby's DNA expression, their epigenetics. And we also know that this baby would have gone through months, if not years worth of OT, PT therapy to address an issue that was never a hip dysplasia issue to begin with. So the course of this child's life, not just the immediate inconvenience of being in a harness, but the long-term effects would have been felt for years, if not even decades, in terms of how this child would have experienced the world around them.
Yes. And what is beautiful is that as a story, this is a wonderful story, but you have all of the markers of clear, I don't want to say results, but clear changes. So clear changes that you can measure of being dilated 4 centimeters or being complete and ready to push. That's a really clear difference of a before and after. Yep. The baby having a CT scan before and after. It's a really clear markers. But then I love that you bring in the additional part into the future of life being better, life being improved. And the markers are more hypothetical at that point. But at the same time, we have these solid things of this is the procedure when a baby is breached. This is the procedure when your labor is stalled. This is what we see in so many babies who have been born from a cesarean. I want to bring up too, though, you mentioned briefly that this was during COVID. And I know that was such an added level of stress for so many pregnant women specifically.
Yep.
That this wasn't just a time period where I would love for all women to give birth wherever they feel the best supported and in their favorite way. But that was a
Mhm.
particularly stressful time. Do you feel like that stress was having an additional impact on moms and babies?
Whether people realize it or not, the cumulative stress of physical, chemical, and emotional trauma, even the anxiety and nervousness of what the hospital procedure is going to be like, the walking around being afraid of being exposed to a virus, these triggers, these stresses don't just influence mom's mental health and well-being, it influences the internal environment that baby develops. A baby that's developed in an environment of love and safety versus one of fear and anxiety and stress is a completely different environment. And it primes the nervous system of this baby to transition into the world in a completely different manner. And so I think sometimes there's this sense that we want to try to pretend that humans aren't part of the animal kingdom. And if you take any animal ever and you change its environment, you alter the environment, the stress in which that animal is existing, it's going to affect their behavior. It's going to affect their health. It's going to affect the long-term survival and thriving of that species. And humans are the same, right? We can't have a global pandemic or even kind of the anxiety and stress around public policy and not have an influence on human physiology, and especially how developing babies in their mother's wombs are going to be affected for generations.
Yes. So I was going to ask, and I feel like you've just answered it. We tell women you're strong, you're powerful, you were designed for this, you have your innate intelligence at work. And, you just shared this is why we have complications in labor, is all of these stressors. This is why we have babies born in distress. This is why we have just complications where you're like, this should be a healthy, happy,
Mhm.
you know, easy situation. I think about, I don't know if anybody has, you mentioned animals, if anyone's had the opportunity to watch an animal give birth, but that is a wonderful experience. I would love for every teenage girl who may or may not have babies later to see an animal give birth and experience that. Our cat gave birth during COVID, actually, in June of 2020. And she was a first time little mama and gave birth to these kittens in my son's room. And we got to watch her labor. One of the kittens was born almost into my hands because I couldn't help but interfere, right? And so, but just watching that she innately knew this is a young cat, a young mom, and she knew what to do. We didn't need to be there. She had no interference in that way. She just turned and licked those babies and loved them. She nursed them well. She knew how to do everything.
There's an expression in chiropractic:
Go
nature
ahead.
needs no help, just no interference.
Yes.
I'm about to give a talk, and the concept of the talk is this difference between our innate intelligence versus our educated intelligence.
Mm.
And I think one of the challenges is our body knows what to do so well and it gets it right so often, but we don't recognize how, in an effort to apply our educated mind, we often create interference, whether it's
Yes.
through moms being overeducated, trying to control and analyze and use their brain to regulate a physiological process, or whether it's outside of even our own educated intelligence by handing over our power in labor to providers who don't know what's happening in our body, who don't have that sort of connection to us, and using their educated to regulate our physiology. So a big part of chiropractic and the philosophy that guides chiropractic is this idea that in living beings, there's this innate intelligence, and the intelligence is always 100%. The
Mm.
intelligence is always knows exactly what to do, when to do it, but you can interfere with that expression of the intelligence, right? That's where what chiropractors are concerned about is how the spine irritates the nervous system, interfering with the expression of that innate intelligence. Or you could even have situations where there's a limitation of matter for which that intelligence can express through. And so I think one of the things that we need to realize is that in pregnancy and in birth, we have this mom who takes a half cell from a sperm and a half cell from an egg to create one single human cell.
Mm.
And that cell divides and divides and differentiates, forming every part of this baby. And her body knows how to grow this baby. Her body knows when to initiate labor and bring this baby into the world, knows how to nurse and feed this baby from her own body. And she doesn't have to go to school or know how to do any of it. Her body innately knows how to do it. So when we trust that innate intelligence and when we give it every opportunity to fully express itself, and when we minimize the interferences from our lifestyle or from our educated mind trying to control and inhibit that, things work better. Are there complications? Are there things that can sometimes go wrong? In which case, it's nice to have medical science available for intervention in those rare cases, 100%. But a big part of the problem that we approach birth is that we expect those problems. Medicine operates from let's treat women as a ticking time bomb, instead of let's treat women as this beautiful expression of this innate intelligence that we can monitor for things to go wrong and be available if something does. But instead they operate from a place of this is going to happen, so we're here to control it, inevitably when it does, even though they end up causing most of it in the process. And I think that's why chiropractic, I think, is so important for pregnancy, is because we have the opportunity through the adjustment to not only help that innate intelligence be expressed without interference, but we also help with the biomechanics of the pelvis, with the position of baby, with the stress levels of mom, with the environment internally that baby is growing in. And all of these things just work better when we're well adjusted and free of that interference.
Absolutely. That is so good. Now, the last thing I want to mention is that you have done research articles, which are brilliant. So I'm going to link them in the show notes for everybody who loves to use their educated minds. I really look at the research that you've done as recorded stories. It's sharing these stories with witnesses, with the data, to just give all of the details so that we can hear these stories. So What is your push for doing research articles and publishing those?
Well, listen, research isn't sexy for most chiropractors. Like, most chiropractors get into the profession because they want to serve humanity and they want to be able to develop relationships with people. And the adjustment is one of the best ways to do that. But the hardest part of chiropractic is not helping people get better. It's getting an opportunity to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people, whether it's because of policy decisions in terms of healthcare and medicine and insurance reimbursement, or it's because they're very data driven. They want research to validate what we do. Now, a case study of a particular result in practice is nice. But when all of us take the time to publish case studies, now there's an overwhelming number of case studies that represent consistent changes. And that's what creates opportunities for more complicated research or for more impressive research to be performed later on, right? You can't get the funding, or you can't create the possibility of those bigger research studies if you don't have the anecdotal evidence published, documented with objective criteria showing pre and post changes. So the more we do that as a profession, it doesn't change the results that we get in our practice, but it creates more opportunities to serve more people. And I think that's the reason why research is so important.
I love that. Well, and it certainly is helpful for people like me who I want to share those things on social media. So then when you have it all documented, published for me, it's just amazing. We love that. So I know that we could talk about all of these things for hours. I'm going to put where people can find you and connect with you. Where is your favorite place to just answer questions or connect with people?
I would just encourage people to reach out to the International Chiropractic Pediatric Association, ICPA4kids.com. I'm one member of the faculty now, and there are thousands of chiropractors who have just as much passion and commitment to perinatal chiropractic. If this inspires you in any way, find a local chiropractor who's doing what I do and connect with them in your community. It's the tick, not the tour, right? It's the principles that matter, not the individual who's delivering it. And I think if we develop that commitment to expanding chiropractic instead of expanding individual chiropractors, I think the profession and the world will be better off.
Love that. Love that. Well, I definitely will put the link where anyone can find more ICPA doctors. You know, you mentioned specific training and things. That's such a wonderful resource to be able to find like who you're looking for, who can be in
Yep.
your area. So I love that you share that. So thank you for your time here today and for sharing this story.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.